Welcome, everyone, and we're glad you could join us for tonight's Westminster Peace and Justice Work Group session. Tonight's session will focus on a legislative recap, so we will learn what bills passed, what didn't, and hopefully some of why and what we can do differently going forward. And we have joining us this evening to help us through that, Rachel Gregoire, and Rachel goes by Reggie. Reggie is the legislative campaign manager for the Delaware Working Families Party. Since moving to Delaware as a military spouse in 2019, she has supported campaigns to raise the minimum wage and establish paid and medical leave. She now serves as the coordinator for the Green New Deal for Delaware campaign. I got to know Reggie as a fellow member of the Police Reform Working Group under the Coalition for Smart Justice. And what I've learned is that we're very lucky to have her fighting for the issues that we care about. So with that, let me turn it over to Reggie.
Hello. Okay, yeah. So we in the Working Families Party, which is the group that I do most of my advocacy with, we have several Rachels. So I revived my childhood nickname. My dad always my dad was a football nut and his favorite football player's name was Reggie. So he gave me that nickname because he was going to force me to like football, whether I was a girl or not. And so I've been Reggie since I was like, as long as I can remember. But we're going to just go through very quickly who I am, what the organization is that I work with, and then we'll jump right into those bills for you guys. And as Lynn said, hopefully try to piece apart the lessons that we have from what's passing, what isn't passing, and why that's happening, and how we can approach things in the future. So this is my son, Diego. I am the legislative campaign manager for the Working Families Party. So though we are a political party, I don't do electoral politics. I just fight for good bills. So I find bills that I believe in and try to activate as many people as possible to also believe in those bills and try to get them going. And as Lynn said, that's how we met, because she's very similar in the way that she approaches her activism, always trying to fix something that's broken and make Delaware a little bit of a better place. What Delaware WFP is we call it a third party running on top of the two-party system. So we're not like the Green Party or the Libertarian Party where they run their own candidates. We just screen people who are already running within the two-party system for alignment on issues that we think are important, on justice, on a lot of the things that you guys are probably advocating for: environmental justice, housing justice, racial justice, all different forms of justice, of course, justice for working people, being the Working Families Party, and really making sure that there's class justice as well in Delaware. So as an organization, we recruit, train, and support candidates. And we also help organizers get involved with either electoral politics or issue campaign work. And in supporting our candidates, one of the things that we do is every week when new bills get posted by the General Assembly, we read every single bill and we go through the very long bodies of text and we say, is this a good bill? Is this a bad bill? What do we like about it? What do we want to change? And we bring that back to the people that we helped get into office and say, hey, could this be a little better? Could this be different? Or please fight this. This is a terrible bill. We really try to support them as they're approaching, 400 and something bills a year. They're not always going to have the time to go through every single one. So we have a team of people that does that. And I'm bringing some of that knowledge base to you today. So the legislators that we've worked with in this past year are Senator Marie Pinckney, Representative Larry Lambert, Representative Sheree Moore, Representative Eric Morrison, and Representative Medina Wilson Anton. You can see them pictured here. As you can see, when we say we're trying to represent the multiracial, multicultural working class, we really back that with who we try to get into office and make sure that as much of our community is represented in the legislature as possible. If you want laws made that take everyone into consideration, you need lawmakers who take everyone into consideration. And the best way to do that is have people with the lived experience of many different walks of life. Hi, Donna. All right, so some of the areas that we focus on, voting rights and government accountability and transparency is a big part of that, because no matter how many good people you get into office or how many good laws you passed, if there's not accountability for making sure that those are followed, then the rest of it doesn't matter. Healthy communities and environmental justice, housing justice and homelessness, fair policing and criminal justice, and then fair wages, benefits, and labor protection. That's the working families part of what we do. As you can see, as a justice working group, we have justice in what we work on quite a bit. So hopefully that this is relevant to this group. All right, any questions so far before I dive into what passed? Yes, no, maybe? All right, well, let's see what happened this year in the General Assembly. All right, so first category, environmental justice. We passed something called SB 270. This was a school air quality bill. And when Lynn was talking about, why did this pass? Well, this passed because everybody was really scared of COVID-19 and suddenly concerned about air quality in schools and kids getting sick and teachers getting sick and them bringing that home to their families and their parents. And so we had the political will to get a bipartisan bill for an environmental bill, and you almost never get that. And this time everybody could relate to, hey, well, let's make sure this air quality is clean. Let's make sure that the filtration systems are good and that they're working. And this was an incredible win for justice, because air quality metrics are directly correlated with outcomes in schools. Schools with poor air quality have lower test scores. Kids can't learn if they can't breathe. And they can't learn effectively if there's a bunch of contaminants in the air. So this was wonderful. And the WFP connection here is that the main House sponsor was Representative Sheree Moore. And then it was also co-sponsored by some of our other legislators as well. So we were very excited about this bill. And it honestly passed with very little fanfare and very little noise, which sometimes that also can help, because the more noise a bill makes, the more opponents come out to be like, no, not that one. We don't like that. But if you can do it quietly, every once in a while, you can sneak through something really great. Another one that passed somewhat quietly was HB 259. This is emergency alerts for catastrophic releases. So if you guys remember when the Crota plant had the big pollution event and there was pollution all over the air and they shut down the Delaware Memorial Bridge, and the people in the neighborhoods right next to that bridge had no idea this had happened. They were outside breathing all that. Cars couldn't drive across the bridge, but people were not told to stay in their houses and protect themselves. And part of the reason for that is that we had a really antiquated emergency alert system that only worked if you had a landline. A lot of people don't have landlines in the year of our Lord 2022. So everybody who didn't have a landline didn't get that message. So now this uses the same emergency alert system that we use for catastrophic weather events and hurricane warnings, and all, so that it comes to your cellular phone, it comes to your landline, it comes to your TV, it comes to a lot of different places to make sure that you have the best chance of protecting yourself in the event of there being a catastrophic pollution release near your house. So another huge environmental justice win that happened very quietly. Fines and fees. I don't want to embarrass you too much, Lynn, but this was Lynn's baby. I'm sure you guys have heard about this before. But gigantic win of something that has been worked on for a long time, and a great sign of how sometimes you pass a bill quietly, sometimes you pass a bill by having a very impactful issue campaign. And a lot of people using the same messaging and whittling away at legislators until you turn everybody in support of the bill and you get enough votes to pass it. And Lynn is phenomenal at that and could teach a masterclass in reaching out to the right people and getting the right messaging for each person. So HB 244 passed, and this was a big package of policies within one piece of legislation that really limited the debtor's prison concept, that all the different court imposed financial obligations that suddenly, you did something that wasn't illegal, but you got a small fine, and now you didn't pay the fine, and now you're going to jail, or now you're, in perpetual debt that's making you a criminal for non-payment, and really your crime is poverty. This one was huge. It was co-sponsored by all of our Working Families Party representatives. And one of the things that I also noted here was who in the Democratic Party, being the majority party, voted against some of the good legislation, because this is one of the things as we look forward, we need to change our messaging for these people, or recruit our friends who live in their districts to be a little noisier about certain issues, or otherwise get them to kind of get pulled over to the right side of things sometimes, because you will see certain names that just show up over and over and over again on some of these bills, as the Democratic knows. All right, gun reform. This one I will chalk up to capitalizing on the moment. So obviously, whenever there is a big tragic event, there's a lot of momentum for policies that might have otherwise been stalled. And I think the General Assembly was very wise to go, we have a moment where we can push through common sense gun reform laws, and we can do it without a lot of ability for our opposition to push back, as they still push back a lot. There was a lot of people with guns standing around Legislative Hall at the end of the session, but there's less pushback than there might have been had there not just been this tragedy in which we watched a ton of children lose their lives too young. And so this very much, I think all of these got passed because of that event, which I hate that we have to do that to pass laws at times, but I also think it's something to remember that, like, when you have what we call a movement moment, you have a moment in society that gives your movement traction, you have to jump and get the bills then, because it's a lot harder when people have forgotten about that thing a year and a half later. And we saw that with the police reform legislation, that it took so long to get going that by the time there was a bill ready to run, the momentum and the political will to pass it had passed. And unfortunately, it'll likely have to wait until there's another big police brutality incident before we get the police reform legislation passed. So Senate Bill 6 was limiting high capacity magazines. I'm just going to go through these fairly quickly. Where'd it go? Senate Bill 8 bans pieces that convert handguns into automatic weapons. Senate Bill 302 holds handgun manufacturers and dealers liable for reckless or negligent actions that lead to gun violence. And then this one is a HB 423, criminal background checks for firearm licensees. And one of the things Linda and I talked about before this was that in progressive circles, there are times when we hit a wall with gun reform legislation where we don't have a lot of agreement. There are people who say, hey, anything that creates safer communities is wonderful. And there are people who worry about who will be most impacted by these laws. And this is one where you'll see that none of our Working Families Party candidates were comfortable backing this bill, because often when you look at criminal background checks, you also have to look at who is disproportionately charged with crimes, and is this going to create a situation where there's sort of race or class differential in who has access to firearms and who doesn't? And does this create a justice and equity issue? So none of our legislators were comfortable putting their names on this particular piece of legislation, though I do believe they all voted to pass it. So sometimes we have things that there's not a clear good or bad on the bill. And then this one bans the sale of assault weapons. This is House Bill 450. So all of these just recently got signed by the governor. They are done. And the last one was raising the age to purchase most firearms from 18 to 21. I think it allows like BB guns and airsoft guns to be purchased younger. And it makes some exceptions for people who are working in law enforcement or in the military who like have guns for their jobs. All right, the next category is labor bills. This was one of the ones that I worked really hard on at the beginning of the year. And this was the paid family and medical leave program, which allows for paternity leave or maternity leave, either parent, of 6 weeks, and family caregiving and medical leave. So if you're caring for an older parent or your kid has surgery and they're convalescing and you need to be home with them, you can take a certain amount of partially paid leave paid out of a state fund. This was a long time coming and it did get passed, but in that process got watered down some. It was supposed to be 12 weeks of family caregiving leave. Now it's 6. It was supposed to start right away. Now it's delayed for a few years. So a lot of times the process to getting a bill passed means giving up a few things that we would really like a bill to have in it. And that's how you get it across the finish line.
Just, Sarah's a member of our congregation, so we know a lot about this bill in general.
Okay. Yeah, Sarah did a phenomenal job navigating the politics of that. And as I said, I did a lot of work on this. The Working Families Party electeds all co-sponsored it, and we helped run the issue campaign and bring awareness for some of those legislators that needed to be pulled across the finish line a little bit. And then House Bill 205. This was another one that was a Delaware WFP bill. We had the prime sponsor, Representative Larry Lambert. This is Delaware Earns. What this is essentially a pension program for people who work at small businesses. So if you work at a business that doesn't have a pension, you can buy into a state funded pension program, gives you retirement, so that one, it supports the small businesses that can't afford to give all of their employees retirement. And it also supports those often lower wage workers employed by small businesses, and still gives them something to turn into their retirement accounts and save for their futures. So this one was a big heavy lift and got across the finish line, and just, I think, is getting signed tomorrow. So it will be official, and the next generation will have a chance to have a pension in Delaware, which is not a given a lot of the times. And then this one, this was Representative Eric Morrison, also a Working Families Party legislator. It's House Bill 354, prevents an employee's citizenship or immigration status from being used to threaten them if they're a whistleblower. Particularly in Sussex County, where there's a lot of farming communities, there are quite a lot of people brought in for harvest seasons, sometimes brought in from other states, sometimes brought in from other countries. And if the working conditions are poor, they don't have a lot of recourse because they're afraid of being reported for being undocumented or for not being, having overstayed a visa or something of that nature. And so this makes it so if you are being abused at work, it does not matter what your citizenship or immigration status is, you cannot be penalized for that whistleblowing, and that can't be used against you. So this is a big win for a huge segment of the population. And as somebody who immigrated myself, really excited to see that bill passed in Delaware. And then this one, House Bill 377 seeks to address long-term workforce solutions for early childhood education. So this was the concern about how we keep losing early childhood educators, and particularly in COVID, this was a problem that if somebody got sick, there wasn't somebody to back them up. Childcare centers were shutting down. They didn't have enough staff to keep up with all of the illnesses and the people being out of office. And we found how many people had trouble getting to work because they had trouble accessing childcare before their kids were school age. So this is requiring the Department of Education to create a comprehensive plan on how to retain professionals in early childhood education. And because that's so important for both, allowing people to have income during the years that they have a young child, and for child development, how important those early years are. This is a big win. Representative Moore has an education background, so she often runs these kind of education bills that other people might not have thought of. And so we're really glad that she's in the General Assembly to do that. And finally, the voting rights bills. I think these also are an example of a great coalition of people working on them. There was a coalition with 90 members working to get these voting rights bills passed, and also the sort of momentum of it being an election year and wanting to make sure that as many people got to the polls as possible in this election year. And I also think coming off of the temporary rules we had with COVID-19, where people were allowed to do mail-in ballots for medical reasons or for just to keep themselves safe. There was a lot of interest in saying, what can we do to mimic that? Because we had a historic turnout that year, and it would be great if more people's voices were heard in the election. So what we passed, House Bill 25, same day voter registration. So if you show up and they say, hey, we don't have you registered, you can register right there, you can still vote. And again, you can see we start to have some more Democrats who said no. Representative Bill Bush in the North Dover area was opposed to this piece of legislation. Senate Bill 320, this is vote by mail. This passed, but has been contested by a few different organizations that are suing to stop the bill. It will not likely, the lawsuit will not likely be active in time to stop the primary, but it could affect the general election. So stay tuned for how that goes. But for now, we have vote by mail, and we'll have it for the state primary. Any questions before we go on to what failed?
Wow, that's a great summary. I learned about a couple bills that I didn't know about, so that was great.
A very comprehensive spreadsheet. Yeah, you guys can just come off mute and ask.
Go ahead.
Concerning the state retirement plan, I'm curious, is there a state match involved, or is the state just facilitating setting up the 401k type accounts?
I know it initially had matching in it. I'm not sure if that made it into the final version of the bill, but I can certainly check with the sponsor and ask.
Thank you.
But I know that had been the initial plan, was to have matching in there.
Thanks.
I have a question on the high-powered magazine limitations, gun magazine limits. What is the, I should maybe know but I haven't read it. What is the limit that a magazine can hold under the law now?
I may have to answer these questions with a list, because this was another one that was under debate. At first it was 18, or at first it was, I think, 12, and there was a bunch of people saying 12 is ridiculous. That's not a high capacity magazine. Then it was 18. I'm not sure where they landed in the end. I know that people were unhappy with where they landed, so I believe it was somewhat on the low end, where there were people saying that's not a high capacity magazine. That's a perfectly normal magazine. But it's not very high. I think that was
16. Yeah, I don't remember where it ended up either.
I think it might have ended up being like 17 or something.
That's still a lot, isn't it? But I guess, is that in there for, I assume that's in there for sportsmen who shoot for shooting.
Well, and there's quite a lot of, I think that a standard pistol magazine is 10 to 12. So I think if you go any lower than that, you'd have most magazines not being allowed unless you're having single loader.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm trying to look it up, but I may have to send an email to Lynn to forward to you with answers to some of these questions, because I don't have all of them. It says, it's not in the summary, so I'd have to dive into the meat of the bill, which would take some time. So maybe I'll grab some of those at the end. And Roger, did you have a question?
Well, I have one comment. There was always a problem with the definition of assault weapon. And I'm just curious, maybe I should just read the bill, how they got around to defining what an assault weapon was, because so often we heard on a national level, well, you can't write a bill because, by the time you make a definition of assault weapon, the industry has changed. So I'll just, make a note.
Yeah, so this act defines machine gun as it is defined under federal law. So it matches whatever the federal law is. It says, including an auto sear or Glock switch, anything that transforms a semi-automatic gun into a machine gun. So
I guess there is a federal definition then.
Yeah, there's some sort of existing federal definition that they're matching. So it's 17 rounds of ammunition. So large capacity magazine is defined as ammunition feeding device with a capacity to accept more than 17 rounds. So usually it's 10, 12, and then the next step up is 18. So they put it just low enough to cut off those 18 18-round magazines.
The other question I had was about the very first bill that you mentioned, which was, I think, about air quality at schools. I presume that this is all air quality inside the schools and not air quality around the schools.
Yes, so it's making sure that the interior air quality is tested and that there's sort of a mechanism that's triggered where if the air quality is below a certain point, they make sure that they're servicing their HVAC, that they're going through certain steps to make sure that they get that air quality fixed. And it also provided funding for
PLC.
filtration systems.
It's always harder to clean dirty air, though.
Yes. So yeah, the hope is that they, maintain their systems and that they follow the proper maintenance protocols and they just keep clean air. But certainly I think that when schools are short on funding, that's easy to forget in your own home, right? You're like, oh gosh, when did I last check my filter? And then you go up and look at it and you're like, oh, that's gross. I should have done that several months ago. So certainly when it's in a school where all of our children are breathing it or our grandchildren, that oversight is affecting a lot of people who don't have a say in whether or not you checked the filters. So
whenever you do things like that,
actually do that and has an accountability metric for it.
There is an accountability metric. That's good, because then there's always these, well, this is another unfunded mandate. You make us do things, but then you don't provide any money.
Yeah, this is funded. It's got funding for it. It had a decent sized fiscal note, which again, I think normally you would not get Republican backing for that unless it had just happened after COVID-19. And actually one of the big champions for it was Representative Mike Ramone, who was concerned about it because he runs fitness and healthcare centers and knows how air quality impacts those. So it was like, just because of his personal lived experience, he was like, I may be a Republican, but I really care about air quality. So I'm going to convince all of my colleagues that this isn't a partisan bill and that it's something we need. And so he was honestly a valued champion of that.
That's good.
You have to give credit where credit's due sometimes.
Thank you.
All right. So now we will dive into what failed if we don't have any other questions. All right, so the first very public story I think that everybody heard about failing was cannabis reform. They ran this twice in one General Assembly, or twice in one, several times in one General Assembly, twice in the last year of this General Assembly, since the General Assembly is technically the 2-year period. First, they ran a comprehensive bill that included legalization and a bunch of equity provisions, making sure that we undid harm that was done to people who have been impacted by the war on drugs. And then when that didn't pass, they broke the two pieces apart and they passed a simple legalization bill. This did pass in the General Assembly, but it was vetoed by the governor. And then when something's vetoed by the governor, it has to go back to the General Assembly. They have to vote again to override that veto. The number needed to override the veto was the same number of votes it needed to pass, but several people pulled their vote after passing it the first time. So as you can see, our good friend Bill Bush is there again, voting no, and several other representatives who I think either for sort of alignment reasons to say like, hey, the leadership of the Democratic Party is all on the same page, because you can see Valerie Longhurst, Pete Schwarzkopf, those are Democratic Party leadership. And I think they generally aren't going to go against the governor if the governor has asked them not to. And some other people who I think were late arrivals to the cannabis legalization party and were easy to like sway back the other direction. So Andrea Bennett is one of those. Stephanie Bolden had not voted for it the first time and didn't vote for it the second time either. And then this is the equity provision piece. This is something to watch for next year, because they will, of course, probably try to run this again. Even if they wait till after we have a new governor, they will eventually try to run this again unless it passes at the federal level. And one of the things that advocates were really trying to do was get a justice piece in here. So they were trying to make sure that a lot of times you outlaw people being allowed to work in the cannabis industry who may have worked in it previously before it was legalized. Also, they wanted to make sure that everyone was let out of prison who had a previous cannabis possession charge if that charge would not be relevant with the new bill. And so some of those provisions were in there, and this was what our friend Bill Bush, that was what he told me was his reason for being against this. He said, I would actually love to legalize, but I don't want, he's a criminal defense attorney and has strong beliefs on criminals who get into jail belonging there. And he said, basically, I don't want to let people out, and I don't want to give them the privilege of participating in this industry. And so this didn't get a chance to be passed because the veto was overridden, but these two gentlemen might have killed it anyway.
I can imagine that being a defense attorney or being involved in that, he might have known that many of the people convicted had been pleaded down to a lesser crime. They
Yes,
may have
that's exactly.
They may have had a ton of marijuana, but they say, well, all right, I'll plead guilty to having 2 ounces. You know,
Yes,
he
that was
probably was
exactly what he said was his
quite aware of that. Yeah, right.
And yeah, I think the difficult part is there may be those, and then there's also people who may not have been, who now are lumped in with that. So it's like, do you try to make sure that you stick it to every person who exceeded that limit, or do you worry about the people who would be kept in prison unfairly after this rule change? And he chose to lean one direction. A lot of advocates were really hoping that our legislature would lean the other direction. All right, environmental justice. House Bill 220. This was a constitutional amendment to the Delaware State Constitution. It was going to be in the Bill of Rights section, so it was going to function much like other constitutionally protected rights, where it protects you from government infringement or government negligence infringing on this right. So this was protecting the right to clean air, clean water, and a livable and healthy environment. And so that would mean that if the government did something that polluted the air that you're breathing, the government did something that polluted the water that you're drinking, or if they failed to, say, fix a broken water treatment plant that they were responsible for, and because of that you had polluted water, this would give people legal recourse to ask the government to fix the problem, give them the ability to take the state to court, essentially. This was also a Working Families Party representative who sponsored this. It was voted to table by 2 members of House leadership, the Representative Pete Schwarzkopf, who was concerned that the state might get sued for things they didn't do, which was not in the language of the bill and is not usually how rights work. But I think that there's an education piece there of helping him understand that people can't sue the state for something a company did. They can only sue the state for their own role in a pollution activity. And so because he was concerned about that, and I think maybe advocates didn't get to him enough and answer enough of his questions beforehand, he voted to table. Larry Mitchell did not give his reason for voting to table, so we don't know. And that's something that advocates will have to look into in the next year. Another environmental justice bill, Senate Bill 305, this would increase our greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. This was something that the governor and the Department of Natural Resources worked on with advocates. They were 100% on board. They helped with the language themselves. And it was a response to the fact that we got this influx of funding following the American Rescue Plan package passing. So we had set greenhouse gas emission reduction goals during President Trump's presidency, after he had pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement, after there was all these different things sort of putting us in a position where our greenhouse gas emission reduction goals had to be somewhat conservative. And then now when people looked at their data modeling, they said, oh, we're far exceeding these. We had this influx of funding. We're back in the Paris Climate Agreement. We have a new president, like we're going way over the metrics we'd set. So this was just supposed to move those metrics to something that made more sense for the current circumstances. But we ended up with a conservative think tank, the Cesar Rodney Institute, putting out a ton of information that was like, this is impossible. They're gonna ban cars, like they're gonna take away your stove. And there ended up being a lot of pushback from people, and the governor, after being the initial champion of this bill, went to the legislators and said, I don't want this to pass this year. I need to change the language and make sure people understand that this isn't doing what they think it's doing. So because of that, there wasn't a lot of will to pass it in committee. It did get a committee vote after activists pushed for it to get one. But our good friend Bill Bush and his neighboring representative William Carson, they often vote together on things. They both voted not to let it out of committee. So it died in committee and will likely be brought back with new language from the governor in the next year.
Yeah, we were down in Dover for that one. And, you know, the Sierra Club, as you say, we thought it was golden. We thought we collaborated with the governor. We collaborated with DENREC. We were, you know, the Sierra Club, we were all in on it together. And we just thought we got stabbed in the back. And the emails going around, the CRI is sending out ridiculous statements. But why, you know, why do
the
you
amount of
listen to
people
them?
that just didn't in an election year want to have to go explain to all of their voters that, you know, no, I'm not banning cars, was high enough that they did what they were supposed to do, which was freak people out enough that they killed the bill for an extra year.
Is it
So I
yours?
guess, so the question is, what will change? And because I can see this thing being pushed off now for another, you know, 9-10 months, and fighting it next June again.
So the working group that we're in that's working on it, because I'm in that group with Sierra Club, we are going to try to see if DENREC and the governor can give language that assuages some of those fears from people, because the intention of the bill was never to overregulate businesses. It was to make sure that state agencies were holding themselves accountable for their work and what they do. So that's easy enough to add into the language, because that was never the intention of the bill. We weren't trying to take away cars or stoves. So I know that's part of it. And then there's been talks with packaging that with one of the labor bills that didn't pass for the same reason. The governor sort of pulled his support of it, and creating like a green jobs package, because people who don't really care about green or don't really believe in the impacts of climate change or the necessity of taking bold action often are people who are excited about the idea of jobs and job creation. And, you know, right now, Delaware imports a lot of our power. A lot of our power generation does not create jobs here. It creates jobs in Pennsylvania and in Maryland. And so moving to having more green infrastructure in state means more construction jobs, more jobs with maintaining, monitoring, that long-term job creation in an industry that has a steady decline in Delaware right now.
Is it your sense that then that the governor was not opposed to the, I mean, he didn't change his position so much as he thought this clarification would help?
He said he's getting so much pushback from businesses that he wants more time to work on the bill. So he wasn't saying, I hate my bill now. He said, I want more time to work on it. It was just that advocates were like, so put in 2 extra lines and still run the bill this year. And he was like, we're done for the year. So that was why I think advocates didn't stop pushing and kept saying, come on, run it in committee. You can always change a line. If you need to clarify one line, clarify one line. And I think that he went, I'm gonna take my time on it.
Thank you.
All right, so Senate Bill 101, this is a housing justice bill, provides the right to representation for tenants in eviction cases if they make less than 200% of the federal poverty line. So right now, about 82% of landlords have some form of legal representation in court, or some form of representation. There's legal representation, but they also have the ability to have I forget what the exact name of it is, but another kind of representative who doesn't have to be a lawyer, but could be an expert in this kind of policy. Whereas most tenants have no representation at all. And so when tenants have no representation, they very often get evicted, even if it's very easy, it could have been easily remedied. So this bill was supposed to make it so that they got a sort of the equivalent to a public defender for eviction court. And also that you had to be at least a month late on your rent. So right now in Delaware, you can be as much as $1 you can owe as little as $1 and you can be evicted. So this was, you need to owe at least $500 or a month's rent, whichever one is, I think, lower. And so that it gives you a little bit more flexibility where, like, if you were a little short, somebody doesn't use that as an excuse to remove you from your home. This had, again, sort of the usual suspects, Bill Bush and his friend Bill Carson, as well as several of the Wilmington area legislators. You can see Senator Stephanie Bolden, Frank Cook, Spiros Mansavinos, Sean Matthews. Several of them just weren't on board for this. And then this one never reached the floor, but it did get released from committee on the very last day of the legislative session. This is the Bill of Rights for people experiencing homelessness. This makes sure that you can't discriminate against somebody just on the basis of them being unhoused. This means for a few things, like if somebody wants to eat it, order food at a restaurant, you can't say you can't be here. You can still have food. It was also, if somebody wants to, like, sit on a park bench, you can't say you can't sit here because you look like you don't have a home. It's like, if the public can sit on the park bench, the public can sit on the park bench. If you need to have a rule that's for everybody. If there's no sitting, there's no sitting. If there is sitting, there is sitting. So there's certain things like that. It was the same for, just access to various, like, public facilities that would be accessible to anybody else. You can't discriminate against somebody just on the basis that they are unhoused or seem to be unhoused. This has been a very long fight. They've been working on this bill for about 5 years. It was very hard to get it out of committee. So that's as far as it's made it so far. So maybe next year will be a little bit better. And then voting rights. This one got laid on the table. This was an amendment to the Delaware state constitution to remove restrictions on absentee voting. Our absentee voting rules are in the Constitution. You can't change them without a constitutional amendment. That requires a more than simple majority, which means that you need several Republicans on board. They could not get that. So it was laid on the table.
Reggie, correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't this the second vote? Again, for constitutional amendment, it has to go through 2 general assemblies. And I thought last time, in the last general assembly, it did pass with plenty of Republican votes. So
but given the nature of this general assembly and the sort of conversation around election fraud and stealing, suddenly there was not political will in the Republican Party to make these changes.
Right.
Before, as a minority party, they were like, hey, great, anything that helps us get more people out to vote. And then because of the narrative surrounding voting in the Republican Party and in their, I don't want to say fan base, but in their constituency, a lot of them in private conversations were like, look, I like it. It would be political suicide to vote for it, so I can't.
But again, it just shows the influence of those national politics and cultural narratives, whatever you want to call them, when you have people who voted for it the first time, still think it's good, but have to back away because it's just politically untenable for them anymore. And
then this one was campaign finance reform bill. Right now, people have to submit their campaign finance reports, but there is no actual review of those reports. So Eric Morrison, one of our WFP legislators, when he got elected, he was reviewing his own report and caught that somebody had overpaid him beyond the legal limit and had to refund that person. And he realized that he had turned in that report, been overpaid, and no one had told him. Like, no one had caught it, nobody had told him. So he said, well, this is a problem because here I am breaking campaign finance law. And if I hadn't done my own due diligence, nobody would have ever known. And so he said, well, we want them to be reviewed. We want there to be an avenue for reporting if there is an issue with one of them. And also he wanted to include employers and job titles of donors so that if there's situations where there's a company, there's been issues right in the past where a company gives all of their employees money and makes them donate it to a certain candidate so they can overpay. So it's like, okay, well, if there's a whole bunch of people who work at one place, we might investigate why this is happening. So that one, we did not get any votes for it in House leadership. So it went in the House Administration Committee, which is the House leadership. 3 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and none of them wanted campaign finance reform. They all voted to table it. Not ideal. It's got a long way to go. We thought it was a very simple campaign finance reform bill. It wasn't asking for, no corporate money or, anything like that. It was just make sure your reports are in compliance, give us some data that helps us double check that people aren't breaking the rules, give us an avenue for reporting if somebody is breaking the rules, and that got voted down very emphatically. Any questions about what didn't pass before we go on to what wasn't heard?
Yeah, I'm confused on the vote by mail, because that is, at least right now, legal, right?
It's legal for now. And if the lawsuit goes through, it could get stalled. They could stop it.
But how did it become legal without HB 75?
So previously it was allowed for just COVID. So vote by mail and absentee voting were changing. So we were supposed to have no excuse absentee voting, which needed a constitutional amendment. So because they couldn't get no excuse absentee voting, they now have vote by mail, which is the same thing, but with a different name. So they just had to run a different bill
Thank you.
Allow for that. So yeah, so no excuse absentee voting they couldn't get. So we still have very strict absentee voting rules. If you want to vote absentee, you need to have a good reason, blah, blah, blah. But you can vote by mail for any reason. You just can't be absent.
Well, but that's why it's contested. That's why it's being contested.
Yeah, exactly. So it's being contested because people are like, we see you. And we'll see if the courts hold it up or not. But for now, at least for the primary, you can vote by mail.
Well, some of the information coming out about that is wrong. Like, I even got something from, I think from the Department of Elections that said only absentee. But anyway, I digress.
Yeah, they're scrambling. I think they don't want to have to throw out a bunch of votes. So I think until it goes through this court process, I think that they would prefer to not really activate the public on that one. But technically it passed the General Assembly.
So, Reg, I was on a meeting yesterday that included Commissioner Albans, and they admitted that they're having some difficulty. Sorry, TV's on. They're having some difficulty getting the website up to date.
That also doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, and also that those postcards that or information that has come out, recently was actually developed before vote by mail was signed and became legal.
That's helpful. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Donna. Appreciate that. Donna, I also love that you're on almost every meeting I'm on. You are a powerhouse.
I'm not stalking you, honestly.
I might be stalking you. All right, environmental justice. Here is one that very much got killed by politics. House Bill 69, this was to provide water purification systems to low and middle income houses with contaminated well water. So in the southern house of the state where I live and where I believe Donna lives, a lot of us have to be on well water. We don't have a choice. Public water infrastructure doesn't go to our homes. And a lot of those wells are contaminated. And for people who can't afford to fix that or filter that, now my dog's gonna bark incessantly. This will be fun. There was a proposal by a Republican legislator from Milford to provide a number of filtration systems for people who couldn't afford to buy them for themselves. What he was told was essentially that House leadership didn't like him because he's been a pain on other bills and they were going to refuse to run any of his bills this year. So despite this being an actually good bill that he was running, he wasn't able to run it. So I have been working on this Green New Deal for Delaware issue campaign. We stumbled upon this bill. I started talking to him because he lives about 10 minutes from my house and came up with a connection to him and Russ Huxtable, who's one of the Senate candidates for the 6th district down here in Lewis. And Russ already runs a program for the state where he's fixing septic systems that are broken. And he talked to the people who were funding it and found a way to build in this water purification program into his existing program. So now we got it funded. We actually got it funded at 4 times the amount that was being asked for in the bill. And this program now exists without a legislative process to pass it, which Representative Shoup, who was the prime sponsor on this, really, being a fiscally conservative Republican, really wanted legislative approval if he was going to pass anything, felt that that was something that he thought had a lot of value. But he was grateful that we figured out a way to help the people who live in his district, particularly in the Ellendale area where this is a really big problem. So this is a sign that, like, even when the legislature or the governor or somebody is holding up progress, sometimes there are ways to work around it. And in this case, we found one, and now there are, few hundred households that are going to get cleaner water than they had before.
I have a question. That's fabulous, but that just is for that area, right? That would not be statewide.
It's not. So it's a statewide program, but it will likely be used mostly down here because there are more people on well water and more well contamination because of all of the chicken farms we have down here.
Okay.
So a lot of the wells have really high nitrate levels because of proximity to chicken farms. And I think upstate, you don't have as many of those.
No.
So there's less likely to be contaminated wells. If you had a contaminated well, you would still be eligible for this program. It's a statewide program.
Oh, that's great. Okay, good.
So yeah, that's a really cool one. This one was never heard in committee. It creates a sick and safety leave program, allowing for 1 hour of earned sick time and safety leave for every 30 hours worked. This is similar to the sick and safety leave programs in some of the larger Democratic states. I know California, where I am originally from, has this exact program. This was sponsored by Representative Eric Morrison, but never got a hearing in committee. It was in the Economic Development Committee. So that's one of the things that you'll notice if leadership wants to kill a bill quietly. We call it the desk drawer veto. You put it in a non-friendly committee. So instead of putting this in the Labor Committee, where this would be something that all the labor guys would love, all the like union legislators would love, they put this in the Economic Development Committee, which is all business owners worried about business owner concerns. And so they never put it up for a vote in committee. And that committee chair is, again, my very good friend, Bill Bush. It's not my good friend, but we talk a lot because I'm constantly trying to change his mind. And then House Bill 435, this one was the bill that we made package with the Climate Change Solutions Act into a green jobs package. This is creating community workforce agreements. So anytime we have a big, large scale construction project utilizing state funds, you implement what's called a community workforce agreement. So this provides structure and stability and promotes efficient completion. That's sort of the selling point of a community workforce agreement. You can't strike once you have a community workforce agreement. It's like once it's agreed on, and you can't get slowed up by strikes or by somebody changing their mind about how this job is going to be run. So that's the advantage to the state. But the advantage to the workers is that gets negotiated ahead of time, usually with some sort of labor representation, whether it's union representation. They can't actually require it to be union, but it can be some sort of labor representation that says, hey, we need to make sure my guys get fair pay. We need to make sure they get enough breaks. And then one of the things that they built into this was making sure there was equity in hiring, that there's enough women, that there's enough people of color represented in who is hired to do these jobs, and that the jobs are done by local contractors with priority. If there is a local contractor available, that they get first dibs. Because what we do a lot of times in Delaware is we have these big state projects and we bring people in from Pennsylvania or Maryland to do them, and none of that work goes to local people. So even if you create good paying jobs, they're not going to Delawareans. So this was a bill that had a lot of support, but what the governor's office does is they put a fiscal note on it. They say how much they think it will cost to implement this program. And they gave a fiscal note that said that they thought that they needed to hire 18 new full-time, very high wage employees to manage this program, which is, I mean, there's entire departments of the government that don't have 18 full-time, high wage director level employees. So that's not really likely what they would have needed, but by putting that fiscal note on it, it's a way to say, well, we can't afford it in the budget this year, so you can't even run this bill. So you get to quietly kill a bill without anybody ever knowing that somebody voted against it or that somebody killed it. You just, oops, we don't have the budget for it. Try again next year. So that's what happened with this one. And so the labor unions really want to collaborate with environmental groups to kind of push the two together and combine power, which that's one of the ways you can get things through is, taking two groups and that have different interests and combining their interests to make it a shared interest. So that is that one. And then housing justice, another one that never reached the floor this was from Senator Tizzy Lockman and co-sponsored by all of our WFP legislators. It bans rental discrimination based on participation in government-sponsored rental assistance programs. So it doesn't matter where your funding comes from. If it comes from a voucher, you still have consistent funding coming in. You can still say you need to have X amount of money coming in, but if it's voucher money, that still would be acceptable. This never reached the floor. It never got put on the floor for a vote. And another voting rights one, this is 2 hours of paid time off to vote. I didn't know whether to put this in voting rights or labor, because obviously people who are hourly wage labor, sometimes you have weird schedules. Maybe you work really long hours. Maybe you work really far from your house. Getting paid time off to vote makes it easier for you to go and participate in democracy. This one was never heard in committee or on the floor. And police reform, the one that I met Lynn through. Lynn, I'm sure you've told people some of this.
We had, I don't remember, Hanif, Cheyenne, maybe both have been in to talk about Leobor. So most of the people here probably know the spiel.
So yeah, but I won't bore you guys with all of the details, but long story short, the process of trying to get legislators on board resulted in sort of losing the support of advocates and still not getting the legislators on board. So we're in a try again next time phase for this one. And then this one has been run for many years. Prime sponsor being John Kowalka, who is leaving the legislature this year. And this is a bill to create new tax brackets. Delaware's tax brackets end very low, so that there's slight increase in income taxes for those who have higher incomes, and a slight lowering of taxes for those on the lower end of the income spectrum. This wasn't heard in committee, and the committee chair was Representative Stephanie Bolden. And then this was the Inspector General bill. This one also was never heard in committee, thanks to our good friend Bill Bush. So the sort of summary here is one, we've done a lot of good, like a lot of good things happened this year. A lot of bills that people hadn't even heard of in the past. Issue campaigns were important to passing those bills. Lynn was very important to passing those bills. But some of the really great bills still didn't have the votes, or for some reason were able to be stalled by leadership that knows how to stall them. And so we need more champions for this kind of legislation. It's an election year. Some of you may live in places with primaries. You may have champions that already, maybe you're in a district for somebody like Paul Baumbach or John Kowalko, and you've been in a champion district and you need to keep a champion there. So anything you can do to support some of those really great legislators that keep bringing up these great bills year after year, and not getting them anywhere. We need to keep giving them the backing they deserve. And if you can jump in any of the issue campaigns, I know Lynn can connect you to those. There's a lot of different people working on each of these sort of subject areas. And like, as I said, I know some of you from that already. Donna's in a lot of the same environmental justice meetings as me. Lynn and I are in the same police reform meetings. So there's a lot of ways to get involved. And that's all I've got. So that's the end of my spiel.
Thank you, Reggie. That was wonderful. I learned lots of good stuff. We had lots of questions along the way. I know we're already after 8 o'clock, but we do on occasion let it run over. So if folks have more questions, we'll allow people to get a few more in.
Yeah, if anybody has anything else, then I'm happy to stick around for a bit. But otherwise, thank you for your time and thank you for inviting me. letting me get to know you guys a little bit.
I have
Thank you so
no
much.
question. If no one else has questions, I'll put out one more. For those of us who are in legislative districts where our rep and senator are generally supportive of the things that we are, so working on them isn't going to really do any good. They're already supportive. What's our best route to have impact on things? If if we don't have the ability to become full-time,
Right.
but still want to do what we can, even though it's not our own legislators, what can we do?
So I think one of the things that you can do is that's sort of a quick thing is use the press, letters to the editor, op-eds, ways to say, hey, I'm a constituent of this person. I think they're great. I think this policy they put forward is wonderful, and I want more people on board. Use the press to spread the word about the good things that they're putting out there. That's something that you can, a letter to the editor is about 250 words max. Usually they don't let you do more than that. So it's quick. It's a quick email, and it's a way to get that support out there more publicly. That what I would say is one of the lower barrier to entry ways if you can't sit on, weekly, monthly calls in the middle of the day. Otherwise, a lot of the issue campaigns have monthly meetings where it's just a once a month commitment. And in those monthly meetings, yes, they'll discuss some of these big picture, large event, larger commitment activities. But I know in mine, we're always and if while you're in this meeting, send this email to, and sometimes we have it go to your legislator, but sometimes we have it go to the committee chair, letting the committee chair know that you want that bill to be brought up for a vote. So if you talk to the issue campaign leaders in those once a month meetings, you find the issue you care about, you join the meeting, we will often know who you can reach out to that isn't your legislator. This is the committee chair who's stalling it, or we need to talk to House leadership. They're not putting it on the floor. And then you can reach out to those people that are kind of being the barrier. And then the other thing is activate your friends. If you know somebody who lives elsewhere, if you're hey, there's this really great thing, I can't do anything about it. Sarah's already on board. Sometimes you can get somebody who's a district over or a couple neighborhoods over that is in a different area and has a different legislator who does need to be swayed.
Great. Any other questions before we let Reggie go?
Well, we hope you hang around and can keep us informed, because I learned things tonight that I wish I had heard sooner about the SB 305 and what was really going on. Nothing from the Cesar Rodney Institute was ever made public. I never saw their arguments. I never saw letters from them. It didn't make it into the press. There was nothing in the paper. It was silent. We didn't know anything that was going on unless you were down there talking to people, which was
yes, unless you were sitting in Legislative Hall. And the good thing is for people like myself and Dustin from Sierra Club, who spend an obnoxious amount of time in Legislative Hall, strangely, those lobbyists on the opposing sides are very willing to tell you their argument. They're so confident that they're going to win. They're willing to share with us what their argument is. And so we just need to get as good at messaging as they are, right? We need to learn how to message as strongly as they do and preempt some of that or combat some of that. And a lot of times we're just, this is nonsense and we don't know what to do with this. And sometimes it's just, we need to make sure that we're spreading ours as infectiously as they are.
Well, I hear a lot about conservative think tanks, this and that, and justices and judges and all that. And I never hear about liberal think tanks. Where are the liberal? Is it the Working Family Party that is the liberal think tank?
We're trying to become, we've only existed in the state for one election cycle. So we started with this first group. We got 5 people elected the first try. That's a great run. And they've already started to do some great work. And now we have, like I said, we have that elected support group we started with just reviewing existing bills, but now we're working on bill development and policy research and coming up with those arguments and finding the data. So the more that people get involved with us, the more we're finding people who want to do certain things. Donna's partner and I are working on doing some research to help the Green Amendment pass because there's more data that's needed. And so sometimes, you know, the more we get new members and the more people get activated and get excited about policies that are relevant to them, the more we have the ability to develop those think tanks. I do a lot of recruiting on college campuses. So I have a ton of students who I focus mostly on environmental justice. So I have like culled the environmental justice department at UD and Del State, and I get a lot of phone calls from high schoolers at weird hours and college students at weird hours because none of them go to sleep at a normal hour. I have a 6-year-old. I need sleep. I'm always like asleep and it's just like, oh, it's another one of the kids. But they're fantastic and they're very excited about it. So I think the more that we activate those groups, the more and activate them for different issues. Okay, we've got the environmentalist kids activated. Can we activate kids who care about some of these other policy areas and get them being our think tank?
Okay, great.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Fun.
Great.
Great evening,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Appreciate your time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.